Hey everyone, my name is Ben Chaish. I'm a wedding and elopement photographer based in the Pacific Northwest. And because of that, I photograph weddings in the snow quite a bit, actually. I just love the snow. I love being out in that environment, and there's still something as a 35-year-old guy that is just sort of magical about the snow, still. So because of that, some of my favorite weddings of all time have been weddings that I've photographed in the snow. And also, just kind of as an added bonus, not as many people get married in the winter. So making some money during the winter, at least around here, always a positive. Now, photographing the snow, while magical, also comes with a huge series of issues that you don't really run into otherwise. I've got plenty of tips and tricks as well to kind of help you along the way. So tip number one, my cameras at least, and almost every camera that I've ever owned, is some sort of metal. And when you put some sort of metal outside, it gets cold really fast. So holding on to a metal lens and a metal camera, your hands start freezing. So I've done all sorts of things. You can buy gloves like this that have touch sensitive stuff, so you can use touchscreens on your phone. I've also just bought like work gloves at times and then cut the fingers off. But wearing gloves is number one, because you are going to be miserable if you have freezing cold hands. And actually, my hands are really cold right now because I am in my office and the heat is off. So wearing this giant jacket and this beanie is actually pretty comfortable. Thing number two, if you are out in the elements and it is cold, you're going to be having to deal with a lot of condensation and a lot of just kind of like melting snow. I've photographed more weddings than not where it's been right around that 0 degrees Celsius, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, where, you know, the snow hits the camera or something kind of warm and starts to melt. So one of the easiest ways to kind of get around that, they're called rain sleeves, and they look kind of ridiculous. But if you want to not worry about your camera, I used to photograph for the Seahawks, the NFL team in town, and I would just toss these on my camera, and it made it really, really easy to just have everything nice and protected. It has a little cutout for the eyepiece right here. Even if you have weather sealing, it's kind of just nice to have the peace of mind of being able to just toss it in one of these. So these are stupid cheap. I always have them in a bag. And even if you have to use live view or something like that in an all-out downpour, kind of a no-brainer. The other thing would just be to make sure that whatever lenses you have, if you don't usually use them, is to put lens hoods on. So here's like an aftermarket lens hood that I just got for this Zeiss. What you just really want to avoid is facing your lens up into the air, the sky, because once you get snow and stuff like that on the lens, it's going to start to kind of like disrupt that whole process, and you're going to get smudges and just other things that you might not want. So I would generally just try to have a lens hood on, kind of helps that thing out in general. Another thing I have is sort of like a backup worst case scenario system. It's one of the reasons that I bought the X100V. So this camera is completely weather sealed. Now that I have an adapter and then a filter on here, the only moving piece in here is the lens. And once you put these adapters on, you're good to go. So having this as like a worst case scenario, let's say it's just like pouring down rain or snowing like crazy, I can put my Leicas back in my bag, just shoot this, and it would be awful to lose this camera, but having it be all weather sealed and everything like that makes kind of the peace of mind and everything. The 35 focal length at f2 is kind of a perfect, if you have to have only one lens. I could photograph a ton of stuff with this. The next thing to know is that in lower temperatures, your batteries are not going to perform nearly as well as they do on a warmer day. So one of the things that I highly, highly, highly recommend has always been to have one of these battery banks. I've owned multiple of these over the years. These two are both from Anker, and this is a newer one that also has a USB-C attachment. But having a battery bank and then also these USB chargers is super, super beneficial for me. The nice thing is Anker is actually sponsoring this portion of the video because they have seen me recommend their stuff before, and I've actually spent a lot of my own money on this. But they have come out with a new Powerhouse 100 that not only gives you 2 USBs, but a USB-C and a full AC outlet. The nice thing is I always have batteries in my camera and then batteries on the charger in my bag on one of these. And so I'm always, as soon as I pop a battery out, I put it straight back on the charger. They're constantly just refilling as I go. So I never really have any issue and worry about that happening. And then the nice thing too is this puts out 100 watts. So if you need to charge a computer or maybe like a drone or something like that that might not have USB charging, it has that. It is completely usable, and you're able to bring it on planes. You can also use all 4 of those ports at the same time. It ends up being a lifesaver. The other nice thing about the Powerhouse 100 is it comes with this 45 watt slim. This thing is legitimately really, really small, and it'll charge iPads and phones and everything like that. And this is also the little brick that charges that giant battery pack. So having a small little thing like this is super convenient. I highly recommend these night core chargers for the Leica system, and they make them for all the different stuff. I have these other super cheap ones. This was by Lotire or something, and this one's from Castar. These are for things that, like my Fujis and stuff, that I don't need to rely on. I feel like I can rely really well on the Nightcore ones, and the other ones are just stupid cheap ones off Amazon. So I'll link them all below, but the Nightcore is definitely the one that I feel like is the best value for sure. Now, a couple other things about photographing in the snow other than just like the gear to use. The technique of photographing in the snow, there's a couple things to kind of look out for. The first of which is when you're walking in and out of buildings, you're gonna want to be really, really careful with your gear, because if you've ever been in maybe a tropical environment and you're going in and out of AC, sometimes your lenses will fog up like crazy, and that is the worst if you are maybe going in. I remember I did a wedding at this place called Dunton Hot Springs, so I was outside, I came inside, and then my lenses just like fogged up like crazy. And it took a while for them to, I'm like wiping them off, but it took a while to undo that. What I do is essentially if I can, leave a bag outside or put the cameras in a bag so they're not getting completely absorbed into the environment where I'm gonna have that be an issue. So just know that if you're kind of moving in and out from outside to inside, that kind of lens fogging and condensation can be a huge issue. Another kind of random tip that I, hadn't really thought about a lot, but I've photographed, I live in Washington where it's not always super, super cold, but I've definitely photographed a few weddings in the mountains that were supposed to be kind of like snowy weddings, and it was actually raining. But one of the things you can do to make it look like it's snowing is to amp up your shutter speed. So if you are photographing with like a 1/250th of a second, you're gonna start to get kind of, it's gonna look like rain. But if you bring up your shutter speed a little bit higher to like, 1/2000th of a second or whatever, you basically just wanna freeze those snow droplets or, those rain droplets. And if you freeze them all in the frame and they're kind of splattered throughout, you can actually make it look like it's snowing instead of raining. It's pretty great because then you can add to that kind of atmosphere even if it was actually raining. Now, one of the biggest reasons why I love shooting with rangefinders and shooting manually focused is that I'm not going to run into issues where on a complete like downpour of snow, my camera isn't going to know where I'm focusing. With this, I can just choose where I'm going to focus, and then, I'm the one deciding. I would definitely be worried about, you know, your camera hunting through, stuff like that. So I would definitely go through your autofocus modes, figure out which ones are a little bit slower and ones that aren't going to be just the autofocus mode. I don't even know what it's called, but the one that just like will jump to whatever's in front of it the fastest. I always use back button focus, so that allows me to turn on and off the AF via the back button, and then I can kind of manually focus if the camera is having a big issue with grabbing focus on the snow instead of my subject. The other thing to know is just generally about exposing. You're gonna wanna know a lot about how your camera works and how your files work. For me and the Leicas, anything that's overexposed by a stop or so, those highlights, as soon as they blow on a Leica, are pretty much gone. On the M10, on the M240, those highlights have very little recoverability. So I'm definitely going to want to underexpose if I want to keep any of the detail in the snow or the sky. But if you're shooting on film, often you're going to be seeing a scene that has a lot of white in it, like this. And if you're doing kind of an evaluative meter for that scene, your camera is going to see a lot more bright stuff than it normally does. It's probably going to underexpose a lot of that stuff. And on film, you definitely don't want to be underexposing. So just make sure you're taking good meter readings of, like, you know, people's actual skin tone and stuff like that. If you have a handheld meter, you can go up and actually get that reading. But just know that it's going to be a huge kind of difference in how you should be metering those two things. Because, you know, with digital, you're going to want to underexpose to keep some of that tone in the snow. There's nothing worse than having just like completely blasted out white snow where there's like no detail. It just looks kind of ridiculous and cheap. It kind of looks like you shot it on a phone. But then also, there's nothing worse than getting a bunch of really, really underexposed film scans back. So just knowing that you want to just be really, really intentional about your metering is super helpful. The nice thing as well is if it's a fully snowy kind of area, you do get a little bit more bounce light up from the ground than you normally would. So a little added bonus of having that in your scene definitely helps. Another piece of kind of like clothing, other than obviously wearing a jacket and, you know, keeping yourself warm. I don't have them with me, but buying a decent pair of boots, first of all, and then leg gaiters. They're these little things that kind of go around, you know, the bottom of your leg and then kind of wrap around your boot to make sure that you're not getting snow into your boot or anything like that. Those are super handy because I don't want to wear snow pants and be swish, 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 swish walking around at any wedding that I might be photographing. So I'm still going to wear normal pants, but then if I know I'm going to be in like decently deep snow, I can just toss on those gaiters. It helps, you know, to make sure that I'm not getting soaking wet. It keeps my feet dry. It keeps my legs dry. And also allows me to kind of get out into a little bit deeper snow because sometimes that's where the good photos are. And then lastly, if you are working with, you know, a couple, if it's a wedding or a model or a friend or whatever, just know that like you as the photographer are probably going to be a little bit more dressed up, ready to go. And oftentimes your clients might not be wearing as warm of stuff. So constantly kind of checking in with them to see how they're doing. I find that, you know, I always just tell them, hey, I can be out here all day. I love this, but I want to make sure that you are comfortable because if my clients aren't comfortable, then they're going to look uncomfortable in the photos. So I would say just always be checking in with your clients or whoever you're photographing, just making sure that you guys are all on the same page. You definitely don't want someone to get like hypothermia or anything like that because that would obviously definitely ruin their day. So thanks so much for watching. If you guys have any questions about any of this stuff, I talked about a lot of gear, so I'll make sure to link it in the description down below. And then, like I said, if you have any questions about this or techniques or anything, I've actually photographed in the snow quite a bit, and it's definitely one of my favorite things. So thanks again, and I will see you on the next one.